Welcome to Crossroads. President Donald Trump is suggesting that mass migration is a political weapon. And on a related note, Trump is renewing his calls for voter ID, and he's suggesting the fraud being discovered in Minnesota is actually tied in with a broader scandal related also to mass migration. Also, meanwhile, as part of the growing anti-ICE protests, a group of people alongside former CNN news anchor Don Lemon stormed a church in Minnesota. And now the Department of Justice is investigating them over potential civil rights violations. We'll be going to these topics and a lot more today. Make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's get started. All right, first of all, President Trump is suggesting mass migration is not just, people wanting to come here. He's saying it's being weaponized politically. This is like a giant political scheme, effectively. And this comes from a recent post where he urged supporters to read the new book by Peter Schweizer. It's called The Invisible Coup: How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. And here's what he wrote on Truth Social. Trump says, a great new book by #1 best-selling author Peter Schweizer. We've had Peter on the show before, by the way. He did a lot of other books, including about Uranium One and Hillary Clinton and a lot of powerful figures. His new one is called The Invisible Coup: How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. Trump says it's out Tuesday. He says it is both vitally important and very interesting. Bad things have been happening to the USA, and we must stop it now. He says, we will not let anyone bring down the American empire, quote unquote. He said, buy this book. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT. Now, let me show you what the book's actually about. This is the description on Amazon. It says, every day, ICE is arresting hundreds of illegal immigrants with a criminal record. They didn't just come here, they were sent here. Now, that's a big deal because that's what Trump's been saying, right? The idea that they didn't just come because they wanted to, they were sent here intentionally. That's what he's suggesting, right? He says, our debates about immigration revolve around what happens with immigrants once they arrive. He said, we need to start talking about who is sending them and why. The allegations, for example, of they're emptying out the mental hospitals, they're sending the prisoners here, they're sending their criminals here, they're sending the unwanted here. Is that the case? Well, he says this. He said, for decades, establishment elites sold us the story of immigration as a compassionate renewal of the American dream within a harmonious melting pot. But beneath that narrative lies a different reality. Mass migration has morphed into the most powerful political weapon ever aimed at the United States, one engineered by elites at home and aided by adversaries abroad. It says, now Peter Schweizer, the best-selling investigative journalist of our time, is blowing the lid off this whole series of schemes. And it says Schweizer detonates a political shockwave, eclipsing his past bombshell revelations that have sparked FBI probes and bipartisan reforms, which he did, by the way. He did some pretty big works. It says, urgent, shocking, and overflowing with the national security implications, the invisible coup makes America's greatest political threat visible for all to see and solve. Now, look, on that book also, part of what it alleges is that mass migration and birthright citizenship, so first of all, criminals coming here, but second of all, people coming here illegally, giving birth to kids, the kids become citizens, then they get chain migration, and they bring the whole families in. He's suggesting this may have given the Chinese Communist Party an actual foothold, not just in this country, but in American elections. We'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of five-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. The idea of immigration as a political weapon is now in the spotlight after President Donald Trump urged supporters to read a new book by Peter Schweizer. This is called The Invisible Coup: How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. Now look, part of that book alleges that mass migration and birthright citizenship have even given the Chinese Communist Party a foothold in American elections. PJ Media has this on it. It says in the last couple decades, quite a few Chinese mothers traveled to the United States while they were pregnant. They actually have facilities for this, like birth farms or like resorts. And people who are pregnant, women who are pregnant, they come here, they stay at these places, they have their kid, the kid becomes an American citizen, then they get chain migration and bring the whole family in. It says they did this so they could give birth on American soil. That made their kids automatic U.S. citizens. And the situation gets worse than that. It says, quote, when such children turn 21, they can also apply for resident status for both of their parents, Schweizer stated. An easy way to basically defraud Americans, right? Kid could come here, don't stay too long illegally, just long enough to give birth, have your kid, and in 21 years, they can make you and your husband or whoever else parents, citizens. It says further in, on the Chinese Communist Party's exploitation of this, it says Schweizer wrote that more than 70% of the newborns in Saipan, a lot of people don't know about Saipan. Saipan is actually a U.S. colony. It's close to Japan, closer to China, of course. It's one of the forgotten colonies, but very much U.S. territory. Saipan, part of the United States, huge destination for Chinese tourists. There's a lot of casinos there and stuff like that. They go there to gamble. And apparently it's also a big place where people go to have kids who can become U.S. citizens. It says 70% of the newborns in Saipan are PRC, People's Republic of China, birth tourists, parents who utilize the territory's 45-day visa-free visitation rules and the covenant of the North Mariana Islands to guarantee that their children will have American citizenship. That's a big deal because Saipan, it's kind of set up as like a Chinese tourist spot. That's one of the big industries there. It's a lot of, again, casinos, a lot of prostitution goes on there. It's a U.S. territory, but not really treated that well. And China effectively kind of runs it. And what they're saying here is that it's also a huge point of travel for birthright citizenship. If you're a Chinese national and you want to have American citizenship, that's the easiest way to do it. And that is just one territory. In 2018, the number of Chinese birth tourists could have been as high as 150,000. Imagine that. 150,000 American voters and bringing their parents in within 21 years just in 2018 alone. It says altogether, it has left us with between 750,000 and 1.5 million Chinese who are considered American citizens because of birth tourism. And that is enough potentially to transform our elections. Now, the big allegation here that Trump's pointing to as well is not just the idea of, hey, birthright citizenship, people coming here to vote, people coming here to, whatever else. He's alleging effectively that this is a strategy, that other countries are involved with this, that the Chinese Communist Party may be doing this intentionally, that maybe the Venezuelan government is doing this intentionally, that maybe the Mexican government is involved somehow. That's the allegation here. That the facilitation of mass migration is actually an intentional political weapon. Now, is that all about rigging votes and changing the political makeup of the United States? Maybe for some countries. I think for China, that would definitely be a thing. Not only that, the Chinese Communist Party is an overseas governing branch of its government that actually works on these kids and their families. It's called the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. The Overseas Chinese Affairs Office works hand in hand with the United Front Work Department, one of the overt spy departments of the Chinese Communist Party. They regard second-generation and third-generation Chinese as part of the Chinese Communist Party system. They keep databases on them. They have actual databases of second- and third-generation Chinese. So it could be that your grandma came from China. You're still in their database. They still target you, and they still regard you as part of their system. So the Chinese Communist Party has this and then uses it, again, hand in hand with the United Front Work Department, to try to manage overseas Chinese populations and then use them politically. The United Front specifically is for that. It's a large network of Chinese organizations, Chinese businesses, Chinese unions, student organizations, teacher organizations, police organizations, government worker organizations, businesses, import-export, technology, IT workers, everything. And they're used as spies by the Chinese Communist Party. Coordinated, organized, and used. And yes, if you're talking about people coming here and giving birth and then becoming citizens, they're part of that system too, whether they like it or not. The CCP does document them and has databases on them. Now, the broader picture of this too, it's not just China. There are a lot of countries doing this. When Syria, for example, had its civil war and Assad was, again, opening the borders for mass migration into Europe, they were saying publicly, many people in the regime were even saying that they would basically flood Europe with illegal aliens, with migrants. It was actual political migration, a political tool, weaponized migration. That has been done intentionally with public statements saying they were doing it for that exact purpose. It's been done by terrorist organizations, it's done by gangs, it's done by cartel members who come to America and join the military with the intent of being trained by the U.S. military, including special forces, and then going back to Mexico to train their fighters using American military training. That happens as well. A very large system is manipulating the open system of the United States, and this is a transnational issue, not just here. On the other side of it, my own investigations have shown basically the exact same thing. A couple years ago, when me and my team went down to the Darien Gap in Panama, we went to Mexico, went to, across the U.S.-Mexico border, we did a documentary called Weapons of Mass Migration, and we came to the same conclusion. The finding in that shows United Nations coordination and America's agreement with the United Nations program called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. That is the taxpayer-funded program that you are paying for to facilitate mass migration into the United States, into Europe, agreed upon by our own governments in all these countries and by countries facilitating it in the third world countries, using your tax dollars, funding the United Nations for it, the United Nations then funding a large network of NGOs carrying it out, and also large-scale resettlement operations being done by NGOs right here in the United States. You are paying for it with your own tax dollars. It's a signed, agreed-upon international compact, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. That's the exact name of it. On another note, and on this point also, President Trump is also renewing the call for voter ID. And he's suggesting the fraud being discovered in Minnesota with the Somali migrant community could actually be connected to an even broader scandal across the United States. And here's what he says. And Trump on Truth Social says, rigged elections are common in the U.S. A big deal to say that, because Trump has been saying this for a long time, and as he notes, he says with the presidential election of 2020 being the granddaddy of them all, Trump has not gotten off this narrative. He's never changed it. He has held that he believes the 2020 elections were rigged, and he's now calling for this changes again based on that. Trump says, quote, "We demand voter ID." He said, in Somali fraud scandal, Republicans probe evidence of a blue state election scheme. An election scheme in little Mogadishu. The Somali fraud scandal tied in with something bigger than just robbing Americans. Now, this is the actual story he points to, and here's what it says. This is just the news. It says, as the magnitude and complexity of Minnesota's Somali immigrant welfare fraud scandal comes into clear focus, Republicans in Congress are more boldly talking about it being part of a larger scheme by Democrats, they say, to use illegal immigrants and purported refugees to hijack federal elections and manipulate apportionment that determines Americans' congressional representatives and federal funding. Meaning manipulating citizenship number counts on the census to get more House seats in some areas, less House seats in others, to determine which states get more federal funding, then using the federal funding tied in with these types of organizations that are then robbing Americans and funding third world countries and terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab and what the Somali community was doing. It notes the Republicans' argument goes like this. It says, Democrats reversed Donald Trump's related first-term executive orders and ensured that non-citizens, including illegal immigrants, were counted into the 2020 U.S. Census. It says then President Biden opened the southern border so that millions of illegals could flood the country in just a few years. It's actually worse than that because he didn't just open the borders, they were facilitating it. They even had what they called processing facilities where they'd have people hand themselves in. They would go to these processing facilities, they'd do the biometrics and other things there. They'd then actually document them, and then they'd give them a free bus ticket or free airplane ticket anywhere they wanted to go. And then they funded them doing resettlement and gave them parole to make them eligible for welfare when normally they would not be eligible for welfare. It was actually a lot more than just letting them come in illegally. It was facilitated mass migration. That was what was happening. My documentary, again, explains this. It's called Weapons of Mass Migration. We haven't seen it yet. But it says this. Next, liberal nonprofits helped move those migrants from the southern border red states where they were not particularly welcome to, quote, sanctuary cities and Democratic-run cities in the election battleground states and help them enroll in welfare at the taxpayer's expense. Meaning, swing counties, swing states, people establishing sanctuary cities, facilitating mass migration specifically to those areas, and then allowing for mass fraud to take place through welfare programs. Taxpayers funding a scheme against this country. It says, and finally, Democratic leaders like failed, it says, vice presidential candidate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, they say, failed to act, or even worse, looked the other way. Now, in Minnesota, briefly on that, there have been documented whistleblowers who had stepped forward in the past, noting and saying and giving evidence that the Somali community was actually robbing Americans, that they were committing mass fraud through welfare schemes and daycare schemes and Medicaid schemes and COVID schemes, that they were sending money back to Somalia, they were funding terrorist organizations, they were buying like fancy, fancy cars using stolen money. And not only were they silenced, not only were they not listened to, they were actually suppressed and attacked. A lot of the whistleblowers were punished. None of it was investigated. In fact, if you raised a call over it, you would have been punished. And not only that, but there were efforts taking place to effectively clear the way to allow for more fraud to happen within the political systems in that state. Was that intentional by the leadership? That's currently being investigated. We don't know yet. We'll find out. But it says this. It says, with all this happened, when evidence emerged that non-citizens were defrauding those safety net programs by the tune of billions, with a B, billions of dollars. And liberal judges blocked efforts to stop or punish the fraud. But Republicans are now on the investigative prowl and sounding increasingly confident that they can find and prove it was an intentional strategy. And that would be a huge, huge deal. If this was an intentional strategy, that would be big because guess what? That would mean it paints the efforts to block ICE and deportations as being tied in also with an intentional strategy. That would mean the sanctuary state laws and the sanctuary city laws are part of an intentional strategy. That would mean the mass open border programs would be an intentional strategy. That would mean that the programs allowing for fraud to take place, getting rid of red tape, preventing people from doing this, getting rid of oversight, punishing whistleblowers, silencing critics, also part of an intentional strategy. That could even mean the international programs where other governments in other countries are weaponizing mass migration, doing this with the cooperation of people within our own country, funding it, agreeing to it, hiding it from the American people, could also be part of a quote-unquote intentional strategy. If they were to actually bring charges on this, you would have effectively a conspiracy to maybe overthrow our government. You would have a conspiracy to undermine the system of government of the United States. You would have a conspiracy to flood us with criminals and rapists and gang members. You would have a conspiracy to basically expose Americans to mass harm, to poison us with fentanyl, to riddle our streets with gangs and grooming efforts and fraud and theft and funding of terror organizations, maybe even the media being involved with this, maybe even the efforts to put DAs and judges in place who would clear the way for it. All of this being a quote-unquote intentional strategy. If that were to be the case, this could be probably the biggest story of our time. Maybe there's bigger. It's a wild time. 2026 is turning out to be a wild year, but that would be huge. And again, also on that point, if you haven't seen my documentary that exposes, this was a coordinated effort. I show you the actual agreed upon programs for it. I show you how the exact thing works. I show you the buses. I show you the processing facilities. I show you the United Nations tents and operations. Me and my team went boots on the ground into the jungles and investigated all of it, and we show it to you. You can actually watch that right now on Epoch TV, epochtv.com. Again, that documentary is called Weapons of Mass Migration. I exposed it a couple years ago. You can watch that already. Now, meanwhile, as part of the growing anti-ICE protests have been taking place trying to block deportations, a group of people alongside former CNN news anchor Don Lemon stormed a church in Minnesota and talked about how they were going to do it. Why target a church? What did a church have to do with this? Well, obviously, people who go to church, they think are maybe more conservative. I don't know why they targeted a church. You could call that religious discrimination. You could call it religious harassment. They went in there, they blocked people from leaving, the allegation is, and now the Department of Justice is investigating these individuals, these protesters, for potentially violating the civil rights of the people in this church. Fox News says this: President Donald Trump's administration launched an investigation after an anti-ICE agitators stormed a church in Minneapolis during a service on Sunday. It says dozens of agitators burst into the city's church sanctuary roughly halfway through the service. Attendees of the church told Fox News Digital. There's actually videos of it. You can see them doing it. Crying little girls being comforted by their parents as these people go in there and yell at them and cause a scene and then block the exits and everything else. It says the mob stormed the building believing that one of the pastors is the acting director of ICE's St. Paul field office. It says top-level members of Trump's administration vowed an investigation after the unrest on Sunday. And here's what Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement, quote, "I just spoke to the pastor in Minnesota whose church was targeted. Attacks against law enforcement and the intimidation of Christians are being met with full force of federal law." Now, briefly remember, the Trump administration actually has created a commission, like an organization, to protect the rights of religious believers, to stop discrimination of people based on religion, especially to protect Christians who, again, they argue were targeted and discriminated against and labeled under the Biden administration. Remember, at the time, even devout Catholics were labeled as right-wing extremists. Evangelical Christians were labeled right-wing extremists. They were even in some of the training materials of the military and other departments passed around during the Biden administration. And the Trump administration is currently investigating that basically saying that there was a religious targeting taking place in this country. They now have that in place now. And they're also investigating these protesters who Trump is coming out and saying were actually organized with this, not just random grassroots movements, an actual organized intentional strategy. They're now being investigated. Now it says here, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt also condemned the attack in a statement on social media. And notes footage of the event showed a crowd disrupting the church service with shouts. Attendees of the church told Fox News that agitators followed them into the parking lot as they attempted to leave the scene, with some surrounding vehicles and trying to block them from leaving. On that point, that's a big deal. If you try to prevent somebody from leaving, that's a pretty big criminal charge. You could call that you can call that a type of kidnapping if you really want to interpret it that way. That's a big deal. And Karoline Leavitt said President Trump will not tolerate the intimidation and harassment of Christians in their sacred places of worship. Now, is that a civil rights violation? An easy way to look at these things is you switch the labels. Okay, a group of political actors wants to, or this is really a political organization doing this, right? This organization is doing it for political reasons. So they're carrying out acts of intimidation for political purpose. What do you call that? If you use violence, and I don't think they used violence, but they used, it seems, some kind of threats, probably. You call that terrorism, actually. You call that terrorism if you're doing that with the intent of having a political effect. That goes beyond the threshold of just protest. If you're harassing people, religiously harassing them, blocking them from leaving, that could be a pretty serious thing. Now, I don't think they're going to charge them with terrorism, but they could. They actually could, potentially. The other thing is they were targeting Christians. Now, Christians, of course, are one of the largest, the largest religious group in America. And, over the past several years, they tend to be kind of, frankly, they get attacked a lot. Let's do something. Let's switch the labels. So Christians were targeted by a group of left-wing political actors. What would happen if a right-wing political organization entered a Muslim mosque and then harassed people and threatened them, and you had crying children, and then blocked them from leaving, and then went to their cars and surrounded their cars and tried stopping people from leaving? It's a bunch of, imagine this, again, right-wing actors of a political organization, and they go in and harass a bunch of Muslims, going into a Muslim place of worship, and then prevent them from leaving. What would the scandal be? Would there be criminal charges? What if a right-wing political commentator was with them? Don Lemon was with these people. What if it was like Tucker Carlson? Or what if it was a well-known right-wing political figure? I'm not saying he did this, I'm just saying what ifs, right? How would he be regarded? Would there be criminal charges? Do you think the media would have something to say about this? If I were to imagine that potential scenario, this is what I think would happen. You would have not just the largest scandal in the entire United States. Every news organization would be talking about it. They'd be doing profiles of every person involved. They'd be calling for people to be thrown in prison. I guarantee you would also have international news talking about it. This would be an international scandal if that were to happen. And very likely, the right-wing political organization would be labeled or even designated as probably a terrorist organization if they were carrying out actions like that, or at the very least an extremist organization if they were doing things like that. If the tables were turned, it would be a very different story. So the question is, given the fact that this was left-wing actors of a political organization with a left-wing TV host harassing Christians in their place of worship, should it be treated the same? You tell me. Let me know in the chat what you think. Let's jump into some questions. Questions, comments, anything you want to talk about. Let's see here. Aaron Shimano, you're saying, the book speaks about the U.S. You're talking about Peter Schweizer's book. The book speaks about the U.S., but it is the same about Canada, Europe, and else? Or sorry, is it the same about Canada, Europe, and elsewhere? Yes, it is. My investigation showed this. So the programs of mass migration are actually part of an international agreed upon program through the United Nations. Most countries in the world are part of it. Again, the actual name for the program, if you want to look it up, you can find documents on it. You can find United Nations reports on it. The United Nations reports even list the amount of money they pay for it, even including the money they're giving to NGOs. They even name the NGOs. The actual name for the program is the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. Canada is signed on to it. The United States is signed on to it. Western Europe, all these countries are signed on to it. The countries facilitating the mass migration in Latin America, in the Arab world, in Africa, they're signed on to it. And yes, it's all the same intent. It's all for the same purpose. If you dig into it, the narrative they use is climate refugees, climate change refugees. Basically, they were claiming that because of global warming, do they still call it global warming? I don't know. Because of global warming, you're going to have basically third world countries become uninhabitable. Why does it target them? I don't know. Ask the United Nations. That global warming is somehow going to only affect the southern hemisphere and like east of Europe, apparently. So like the Muslim world and Africa and all of Latin America, somehow global warming will affect all of them. And they say the effect of this is you're going to have climate refugees. And where are they going to go? Well, apparently only to Canada, the United States, and Western Europe. Because apparently these are the only places in the world not affected by this. So what they did is they created an international compact of all these countries to facilitate this. And that's what's been going on. Your tax dollars are funding it. The money is going to the UN and to various NGOs and to the UN and then to NGOs. It's doing both. Operating a massive, intentional, coordinated, well-funded operation to flood your country with migrants or illegal aliens. The same thing that was happening in America was happening in Canada. The same thing happening in America was happening in Western Europe. It's the exact same programs. Again, if you haven't watched it, check out my documentary. Actually, I go to the whole thing. I actually gained access to them. It was very hard to get. I gained access to the camps in Panama. We actually got access to them. The UN people tried to stop us from filming. They didn't have the right to. They were just saying it. So we show you all this. We also show you the buses and the bus programs. I show you what it looks like in Mexico. I show you the processing facilities. I show you the bus drop-offs in the United States. We actually tracked every single layer of this entire operation. So if you haven't watched it, watch the documentary I did. It's pretty shocking. John Wib 305, you're saying, John K. Wib 305, you're saying Canada partnered with the CCP on their Belt and Road. I wonder what Trump is working on to address this. Yeah, so Canada is looking to diversify its economy, and they're actually making trade deals with the Chinese Communist Party, including some things in the Belt and Road Initiative. So Canada's big problem is almost all of their trade goes with the United States. Now, what does Canada actually trade with? Like, what are their goods? What does Canada make? Not much. The Canadian economy was mostly NAFTA type stuff. It was American businesses that went to Canada because of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Alliance or Agreement. And, Mexico as well. That's why a lot of our auto industry is in Mexico. From Canada, it's mostly oil, timber, minerals, and that kind of stuff. So Canada needs buyers. They don't need sellers. The challenge a lot of countries are facing with American tariffs is that this does not affect America selling. So if you have people buying from you, it's like whatever, right? But if you're selling, it's harder to find someone to buy from you than it is to find someone to sell to you. I said this like yesterday. Basically, imagine that Canada is a used car salesman, and Mexico is a used car salesman, and China is a used car salesman, and Western Europe is a used car salesman, and they need to sell used cars. They don't want to buy cars. In fact, they have really, really extensive protectionist programs preventing them from buying cars. So they don't buy cars, right? I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking here, like used car salesmen. They don't buy cars. And then, who's the buyer, right? Well, the buyer is the United States. America buys the used cars from all these people. Then one day the buyer says, well, you know what? I'm buying from you guys and you're giving me bad deals. And so I'll tell you what, I'm going to start making it so that if you sell these to me, you have to give me like a 10%, 20% discount, and you have to eat the costs, tariffs, right? I know it kind of affects people here too, but I'm just saying hypothetically here. They get mad. All the used car salesmen are big mad. So what do? They try to create an international alliance among themselves in order to bypass the buyer. The problem is they're all sellers. How do they make an economy doing that? The answer is they don't. And so that's the problem they face. It's easy if you're a buyer and you go to 100 used car salesmen, you're probably going to find 100 used car salesmen willing to sell you a car. If you're a seller and you need to sell a used car to a buyer and you go to 100 buyers, you might not get a single sale. It is harder to find a buyer than it is to find a seller. And the problem all these countries are facing with the tariffs is that they're looking for a buyer, not a seller. They're all sellers. So Canada making an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, I assume it's going to, it's going to help them a bit. Okay, it's not like this is like a totally random, people, used car salesmen trying to sell each other cars. You know what I mean? They're going to make some deals with this. For the Chinese Communist Party, I would say this is probably more of a political thing than it is a financial thing. Canada's problem is they have a lot of raw materials they need to sell. They need to sell timber, they need to sell oil, they need to sell minerals, and they need to sell that kind of stuff. And so they can sell to China, and China will probably buy it. China has a big old gaping wound where that Venezuelan oil used to be. China has a big old gaping wound, probably going to be affected by lack of timber exports in parts of Latin America. And so Canada is a viable source for that. Canada will probably do that. The problem is the Belt and Road Initiative is not meant to actually help the country that's making the deal with China. It's a deal with the devil, so to speak. This is going to the casino and the house always wins. And for the Chinese Communist Party, the Belt and Road Initiative is set up as a debt trap. It's a debt trap. Canada is going to find itself getting a very good deal at first. It's going to turn to a very bad deal further down the road. We would assume that Canadian leaders are aware of this. Will they continue to do it regardless? We shall find out. But that is happening. And Europe is also, the European Union is also trying to create like a kind of free trade alliance with Latin America. That's going to be interesting because, what Maduro had done and Chavez had done before him in Venezuela, they had worked to push out the United States. They were working on a transnational agreement throughout Latin America to reject the Monroe Doctrine, which is America's policy, basically, that, again, the Americas, North America, Central America, South America, are basically the United States' backyard. And there should be no real engagement, so to speak, or no new colonies with Europe or China or Russia. Basically, if you're not in the Americas, stay out of the Americas. That's the Monroe Doctrine. We haven't really used it or invoked it for a very long time. I know it's not a law. It's just kind of like an American policy. Trump is now saying it's back on the table. And the big picture with this is they're trying to push out Russia, China, and Iran from Latin America, all three of which have huge, huge influence. Now, the European Union stepping in is going to be interesting because the Monroe Doctrine was actually originally there against Europe and European interests trying to make incursions into Latin America. Now, how's that going to go over with Europe? We'll have to wait and see. Europe has very large protectionist policies, as do most countries until now, except the United States. The United States, the reason why we were kind of the go-to place for everybody to try to sell their stuff is because we were one of the only countries without large-scale protectionist trade policies. And the way that India talked about it when America was putting tariffs on them, reciprocal, was, well, we have our protectionist policies because we need to protect our people. And the argument was, well, is it wrong for America to protect our people? You say you do it to protect your people. Is it wrong for us to do it for the same reason? And that's kind of the narrative right now. Europe is saying the same thing. Canada is saying the same thing. They're all saying the same thing. I would make a point, if these countries are actually against tariffs, would the people of these countries, were they also protesting against their own tariffs against the United States? If they're against tariffs, would they criticize their own use of tariffs? No, they do not. They only don't like when America does it. So that's the real narrative here. Ashley from California, you're saying, I had no idea that people can have babies in a U.S. territory can get citizenship. I thought that was only actual states. That's insane. Yeah, actually, I thought the same thing because, it's complicated, right? So let's put it this way. If you're from Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. If you're from Guam, a U.S. territory, and you're born there, you are a U.S. citizen. The technicality is, if you're a resident of that territory, you cannot vote. They don't have voting rights. But if they move to the United States, I believe they can, right? Am I wrong on that? I believe they can. If someone from Puerto Rico migrates to, let's say, New York or New Jersey or whatever, and becomes a resident of New Jersey, I believe they can vote. Because, if you're born in a U.S. territory, you are a citizen. You are an American citizen. It's just, again, if you're a resident of a territory, the territory itself is not really given voting rights. Saipan is kind of one of the forgotten American territories. We basically never talk about it. Really, we never talk about it, or like the Marianas. We don't really talk about them. But yeah, they're a U.S. territory. And they're basically run by the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP has huge, crazy influence there. China treats Saipan like Hong Kong. It's actually crazy how much influence they have in Saipan. I thought about actually doing some work on that, but Saipan is so far off most people's radar. I wasn't sure if people would actually care enough for me to do the groundwork to do some reporting on that. But I can tell you, I've been researching Chinese espionage since 2008, right? I've been a journalist since 2006. I've been doing investigative work since 2008, and most of my work has been around, Chinese spy operations. I've done a lot since then, of course, but I can tell you, somebody who's been researching this probably longer than any other journalist I know of, at least like an American journalist. I know a lot about Saipan. The CCP effectively runs Saipan. They basically run Saipan. Martin McKenzie, you're saying, sad to say, but Canada is on the ropes, and we will soon have a globalist/Marxist nation on our northern border. So in other words, nothing changes, right? Sorry. I'm sorry. Poor Canada. Has anybody ever seen the movie Canadian Bacon? A very funny movie. John Candy and other stuff. Basically, it's like the story is America wants to start a war, and for like the military-industrial complex, and they're like, let's just do Canada. Let's just do Canada. So they have all this like propaganda about the Canadian socialist revolution and how Canada was, went from being a free country to a socialist nation, and how the evil, the supreme leader of Canada, like sitting in his office overlooking the Arctic tundra, is like planning these things against the United States. A really funny movie. If you've never watched it, go watch it. It's a very funny movie. I think most of the actors, if not all of them, are Canadian in that movie. It's kind of a Canadian comedy. Very well done movie. But there's some truth to it. Canada has been a socialist nation for a very long time, unfortunately. The policies there are very, 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 very socialist. And they have, even though, again, they're like, we are their largest trading partner. I don't know if they're ours or if Mexico would be. It's pretty big, right? Not so much to the benefit of America, frankly. We've basically allowed them to rip us off, and we fund their defense. We basically fund Canada's defense. The only defense they have to care about is north. They have a lot of incursions from Russia and stuff, and America basically runs all the security for Canada. Because Canada doesn't have to really have a real military. I know they have a military, but not that large. They don't really have to pay that much for it because America basically controls their defense. They're able to redirect a lot of their money for social welfare. And then also a lot of businesses put their headquarters and operations in Canada. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to Canada, but you see like headquarter and buildings and offices of tons of American businesses. I mean, if you go to go to anywhere, like go to Toronto or something like that, you'll find that American businesses are all over the place because basically we are their economy. You know what I mean? And so it's true that Canada's not doing so hot right now. To add insult to injury, when Trump was asked about, hey, what about that Canadian trade deal? Trump basically said, what about a new trade agreement with Canada? Trump says that it's kind of like a non-issue. He really doesn't care. And that's been the message he's sending to Canada too. Remember, Justin Trudeau said that a 10% tariff would basically destroy Canada. Trump hit him with greater than 10% tariffs. The Canadian economy is really not doing hot. And the reality is they can do some business with China. It's not going to be enough to save them. Canada needs the United States. In order to work with the United States, they're going to have to make some reforms. The Trump administration is also talking about mass migration as being an existential threat to the West. That includes Canada and Western Europe and America. And said that he's going to be exposing, including by interviewing people in those countries, the harm caused to them by mass migration. So if you can't afford a home, if you've been victimized by grooming gangs, if there's migrant crime and it's affected your well-being, the U.S. government is actually documenting that now and is going to be exposing it, including in the U.K., including in Germany, including, yes, in Canada. So, we'll see where that goes because they haven't really moved on it yet. The other side, too, Canada is a huge spot for money laundering for the Mexican cartels. The Chinese Communist Party does it a lot through Canadian casinos within the, how do you call them, like native lands. The Indians, a lot of the Indian casinos, they do the money laundering there, and a lot of it goes through that. That's good old Canada. And a lot of gangs and drug trafficking and fentanyl operations also move to Canada. I know that sounds crazy, but we might not soon be talking about the Mexican cartels. We might be talking about the Canadian cartels. That's going to be a big conversation. A lot of biker gangs, too. A lot of the biker gangs do business out of Canada. Illegal business, right? Alfred's mom, you said Canada can't afford their government. They cannot. They especially can't afford their welfare program. In fact, they already couldn't. Even before this, the Canadian socialized welfare system was not sustainable. They were already recognizing it, and it was already in need of reform. The additional weight put on them now, with everything that's happening, makes the Canadian government, I don't know how they're going to keep funding it. They're going to have to reform it. And, that might mean they have to get rid of free health care. Already the programs in Canada don't work. If you don't believe me, go and read Canadian articles talking about the wait times for medical care. It's crazy. Actually, it's crazy as it is too. The American medical system works as kind of the release valve for the Canadian subsidized medical system. A lot of Canadians go to America to go to our hospitals when they can't get care in Canada because, again, their socialized medical system squeezed the availability and squeezed the number of doctors and everything else. Like, it's really hard for them to get medical care because the system is so squeezed. Jeremy Barker, you're saying problem with being on the good side, we have to follow certain rules. And you're saying, Joshua, I work/patrol on the freeways in a very red state. I have stopped with many migrants that speak zero English from many different countries, Russian-sounding individuals to Chinese to Haitians, etc., etc. Almost all of them flew into an airport. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I assume you're highway patrol. You don't have to tell me. I don't know if it'll affect you if you talk about it. But yeah, you are right? The problem with being a good person is that you have to follow the rules, right? And that's actually one thing. If you ever read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, that's basically what a lot of the communists and socialists do. They don't have any rules. Their rule is do as thou wilt. They can have the craziest, most degenerate values on the face of the planet. They can groom children and give gender changes to kids and run around naked like on the streets and defecate on the sidewalk, and they can do look, go walk around New York for a week and you'll probably see all this, okay? I'm not exaggerating here. They legalized public exposure because they were saying it was racist. I'm not even joking. In New York, that was why they did it. And a large part of it was because they say a lot of like Latino people, I guess, when they get drunk and they want to urinate publicly. That was the grounds on which they allowed for public defecation. That was actually the legal backing or the argument they made to allow it. And you still see it in New York, okay? You still see it in New York. It is true. They can act like that. They can discriminate against Christians. They can go into churches and harass people. They can call people names. They can curse them. They can record them. And they're basically never held to account. If somebody on the other side of the aisle does even a fraction of this, they are slammed to the maximum extent possible. The media attacks them. All the influencers attack them. Government officials attack them. Like non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and nonprofits attack them. They get labeled. They get doxxed. You have Antifa come out sometimes and like physically attack them. The things that people deal with who are conservative, that you get debanked, you get censored on the internet, like you get attacked. You get crazy attacked. If you say something remotely, if you would so much as say something remotely offensive, you'll get slammed by the entire system. And there's basically nothing even remotely comparable on the other side. But if you read like Rules for Radicals, like Saul Alinsky, who dedicated his book to Satan, by the way, to Lucifer, who he calls the first rebel, because it's a Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky wrote about that as one of their strategies. Basically having a double standard. And the argument is basically this. If you are religious and you claim that you believe in a certain religious system of values, then, and you're trying to maintain a certain cultural standard, hey, we shouldn't do that, guys. Maybe we shouldn't allow for this to take place. They say that if you don't abide by an absolute state of moral purity, you have no right to criticize anyone. And while one side has no rules, no expectations, no standards whatsoever, they hold you to the most extreme extent of this. And if you deviate in any way, if you make a mistake, they try to invalidate everything you said. That's kind of the basis of it. Now, I'd say it's ridiculous. And my personal take, being religious doesn't mean you're perfect. I know there are some religious people who are jerks. Let's be honest with ourselves. There are a lot of jerks out there. There are a lot of like moral purists who I would say, tend to use their religion as a stick to beat people with. There are those kinds of people. You find them everywhere. Every religion has those people, right? Everyone has those kinds of people. But I would often say those people are not the true examples of a real religion. They're not the true examples of the good people in a religion. The good people are typically people who are self-aware of their flaws, who are trying to become better people. In my take, those are the true religious believers. A true religious person does not believe they're perfect. You should be careful of people who believe they're perfect. A true religious person is aware they're flawed, and in their awareness of their flaws has a desire and makes some effort to become a better person. That is a true religious person. So you can't like beat people for being flawed. I would actually say that in traditional understandings of, like, I think most upright religions, that was always acknowledged, right? I'm a sinner. Yeah. Doesn't mean you just bask in being a sinner. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean you just stay there. But it means you're aware that you're flawed. You're aware you're imperfect. And you know that you don't always do things right, but you have a desire to. That heart of wanting to become a better person, I would say, is the true heart of a real religious believer. And so this whole moral purist argument and trying to bash people for being flawed is stupid. Everyone is flawed. And I'll tell you right now, if you meet somebody and they're flawless, you should be really careful of them because they probably got some weird skeletons in their closet. They're probably the weirdest people you've ever met. You know what I mean? Those are the ones you got to be careful of. You know, it's why this sounds funny. It's okay. This is a whole other thing about like entertainment and movies and books, but also goes into like this. What makes a person relatable? Do you know what it is? What defines an everyman? If you have a movie character and you can relate to him, what is that character, right? The everyman is a flawed individual who strives to be good. That's the difference between a villain and an everyman. An everyman, the one we can relate to, is a flawed person who wants to become better, right? Sometimes they're not aware of their flaws. That might be the comedic everyman. Sometimes they're very much aware of their flaws. That could be the melancholic, noir type everyman. You know what I mean? Those are the two types of relatable characters. Why is that? It's because a flawed individual is a vulnerable person who's exposing their vulnerabilities, and you can relate to that. Everyone can relate to it because we're all flawed. That's the reality of it. As opposed to a lot of modern entertainment where they want to have absolutely perfect characters, not a single weakness, totally morally pure, the moral purists, they're not relatable. I would actually say that's why a lot of movies are not entertaining anymore. It's because the characters are not relatable anymore. It's because they lack these things, I would say. Michael Baker, you're saying we must revive our cultural heritage. Schools should teach the stories, values, and heroes that define our nations, not the revisionist narratives promoted by globalist academics. Agreed. Very much agreed. This goes into a different understanding of how you relay values. So I found it interesting because I've talked to people of other cultures on like how their moral stories are relayed. In America, what did we grow up on? We grew up on, let's talk about the classics, right? We grew up on Grimm's fairy tales. We grew up on Aesop's fables. We grew up on a lot of, basic kind of fairy tales and stories and mythologies, right? We grew up on stories of the founding fathers. We grew up on stories about, the cowboys and Wyatt Earp and these types of folks, right? We grew up being told about the relative purity of George Washington. Washington is almost like a very pure figure in the American mind, traditionally, right? The wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, the interesting character of some others there, right? I won't get into all of them. we grew up with these stories. And we create a kind of mythos defining the American character, defining who we are as a country. It's the idea of the tortoise and the hare. Just going fast is not always the best thing. Sometimes, slow and steady wins the race. It's the idea that, there are clever people out there going to try to trick you. Grimm's fairy tales, we talk about fairy tales, but actually the Grimm brothers did a great job of actually documenting and preserving a lot of the Germanic fairy tales. This sounds funny, but they actually really accurately documented a lot of fairy tales in a lot of mythologies. You can actually, I have a collection called the Teutonic Mythologies by the Grimm brothers. It's very good. It's a very good history book, actually. It's very hard to find, but you can still buy. You're probably not going to find many now because I'm talking about it. There's only a few copies on the internet. But the Teutonic Mythologies by the Grimm brothers is a very good book. I think it's like a 4-part series. Hans Christian Andersen. These are the basis of the American mythos. It's also why in a lot of the entertainment we create, whether it's TV shows or movies, there's a lot of plays on them, right? We have a lot of plays on the classics. That's the basis of the American cultural thinking. And I know it sounds funny to talk about fairy tales and mythologies as having this kind of significance, but they do. They do. The Arthurian legends is one of the great foundations of Western identity. The history of Rome and Greek mythology, huge foundation of Western identity. A lot of our moral lessons come from these things. And I'm not writing off the Bible too. The Bible's not only, I think, the history of the West, it's also, the foundation of a lot of the cultural ideas. The system of law is rooted in it. The American system was based not on the book of Kings, but on the book of Judges, right? For example. Also pulling a lot from Roman history, which again, a lot of that is even documented in the Bible. The Bible is also a historical document, right? And so without these things, you kind of start losing you lose the mythos. You lose the basis of the ideas that form our culture, our bearing, and our country, right? And every culture has these things. In China, they have, I think, the 3 classics? So in traditional Chinese culture, you'd be raised on the, the I Ching, which talks about their idea of balance, kind of, and harmony. Their medical system's based in it. A lot of their astronomy is based in it. A lot of the ideas of approaching things is based in it, kind of this way of everything has a strength and weakness, right? But also recognizing patterns of change. It would be the stories of Confucius. It would be the Taoist canon. Those would be like their main cultural foundations or value foundations. And then you would, on the mythology side, read the 3 classics, which would be Journey to the West, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and would it be Dream of Red Chamber? I think it would be. Is kind of the foundation of their mythos, right? Their mythos. And so every culture has these things. India has theirs. Western Europe is very similar to America, but a lot of this, some different ones, of course, too. If you strip these away, you strip away the founding stories, you strip away the foundations of a value system, you strip away the religion. What is a man? What is a man? Is it a bald chicken? I don't know. Some of you know that story, right? Anyways, that said, we've gone kind of long today, so I ended here. But thank you all so much for being here. Let me know what you think. Do you think it is possible to have a foundation of culture without these stories? What do you think happens to a nation if you destroy them? If you demonize the founding stories of a country, what will happen to that country in 2 generations? You tell me. That said, thank you all so much for being here. And I want to know, let's talk about solutions. What should be done to fix it? How do we fix it? How do we come back from this as a country? Let me know in the chat. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.